This isn't exactly a problem as such, but it's one of those things that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Just make sure you get a manicure done before you go using it.
Mechanically speaking, you'd like to think that the vast majority of owners are never really likely to have an issue, but there are a group of people out there that really should have some concerns.
Are these as good as the 350 and the 370Z in terms of drifting? Let's find out. Here we go. Now, you might be very tempted to buy a used Nissan Z because they tick so many performance car boxes. However, Nissan as a company are possibly in the worst position they've ever been in. We're talking factories closing down, thousands of job losses and billions of dollars of debt can indicate a company on the brink of disaster. Plus, could these disasters at the corporate level equate to corners being cut in manufacturing? And none of this exactly fills you with confidence, no matter how good a car might be. So what's the story here? Is a used Nissan Z really worth the risk? To answer that, we need to show you how they're aging, and that means delving into what the common problems are. Let's start at the rear. You want to open the tailgate? Well, unfortunately, that might require some luck because plenty of owners have complained that no matter how they try to open it, it just refuses to unlock and open. And when some owners have taken the car back and had it sorted under warranty, the problem just comes back again. However, look, there's potentially good news here because there are easy fixes for this. As long as you're down for a solid DIY project, just check the owners groups and forums, plenty of tutorials on there. Next up, like so many modern cars we've been featuring of late, there are plenty of complaints that the paint is just too soft and it can mark and scratch really easily. Do what Harrison has done with his car and get the whole thing PPF'd. Also, while we're in this area, plenty of owners have complained about some of the panel gaps, especially between the front bar and the bonnet, and even the bonnet compared to the quarter panels at the front of the car. Even on this car, this gap's a little odd, that gap to that gap a little bit different. Just frustrating. Also, the door panel gaps can be a bit out. And this rear black section here, it's actually a really big sticker, and sometimes it doesn't line up the same on both sides. Luckily on this car, it does. However, arguably one of the biggest issues with these panel gap discrepancies is that some owners have found that the paint can wear off between the base of this sort of A-pillar section and the bonnet as it rubs against each other. You need to get this resolved under warranty because it's just shoddy. Next up, if you enjoy driving with the windows down, you might hear a few rattles and creaks and weird sounds coming from the doors. Not super common, but can happen. Now next up, this isn't exactly a problem as such, but it's one of those things that once you see it, you can't unsee it. It seems that Nissan have used frisbees for the fuel cap lid because look at the size of this thing. It's like a dinner plate. And then you have the big issue with the exterior in that pictures just do not do these cars justice. They are such a handsome looking car. I love that the designers have paid homage to previous generations of Zs while still making this thing look completely contemporary. Also, I love just the simplicity of the overall design. For example, this intake at the front, it's not just a vomit of fins and wings and aero and shit all over the place. It's just a simple rectangle with a few little highlights. I bloody love that. Now, the front grille on the Nismo models, that's a little bit more aggressive, as is the entire car with its raised wheels and extra body sticky Audi bits and a bit of red lipstick as well. But just a heads up on these, including the Nismo, these share so much with the previous Nissan 370Z. Basically the same platform, same suspension, same brakes. Even inside, plenty has been carried over from the previous model. The only major change, obviously aside from the aesthetics, is that these things come packing way more muscle. Gone is the 3.7 litre naturally aspirated V6 replaced by this 3 litre twin turbo unit. Now, some muppets on the internet will claim that because this is basically a heavily revised 370Z, that's somehow a bad thing. They clearly know nothing about cars or the costs involved in developing them. If Nissan were to build an all-new Z from the ground up, that process would have been so cost prohibitive, we doubt the car would have existed at all in the first place. Plus, it is such a great platform to build from because it was developed when Nissan were in their strongest financial position, which is quite different to how they are right now. But what's the story when it comes to common complaints and issues inside? Good news here, there are very few. Granted, the Z is still a pretty new car though, so, you know, give it time. But in terms of the current complaints, infotainment systems, look, even when these came out in 2022, this thing felt generations old already. The interface, it's not going to win any awards. It's easy enough to use. Look, chances are you're going to be using Apple CarPlay and Android Auto anyway. And good news, considering this is a modern car, we struggled to find any complaints about dropouts or connection issues. It can happen, but very, very rare. That's pretty much the opposite to most new cars that we film. However, one common complaint about this area barrier actually isn't the infotainment system, it's just that the plastic, the screen, can scratch really easily. Just make sure you get a manicure done before you go using it. Also, the rear view camera, apparently Nissan have used a CCTV camera from the 1990s because it looks terrible and it's pretty much useless at night. Also, plenty of owners have complained that the sound system isn't as good as it should be, considering it has Bose logos stuck all over it. It's not terrible, but just not up to scratch. However, all of this sound system stuff can be so easily upgraded. However, one thing that you might find, and this is a common complaint across all the owners groups and forums, is just the interior fit and finish and just the build quality maybe isn't up to the standards that you're expecting considering the price of the car. Now, this can be especially prevalent in these proto models. Harrison with this car has been pretty lucky, but plenty of them, the stitching here on the dash doesn't line up accurately with the stitching on the door card. If it was my car, that would just frustrate me to no end. And also, and look, this is going to depend on your height and body shape. For me, I'm exactly 13 centimeters taller than rock god John Bon Jovi. He actually used to own a 280Z back in the day, but apparently a lot of owners find the seats to be really uncomfortable. Now, I disagree with that. For me, these are fantastic. I will admit, you don't really want, say, childbearing hips, because I have kind of narrow hips and hopefully not a massive bum, but I'm already feeling a little bit squished in here. I personally like that because it makes you feel almost like these are race seats. I don't think I'd get too uncomfortable in these seats over a long period of time, but if you are, let's say, copious of size, yeah, this could get uncomfortable. Also, the seats in the Nismo, they are proper Recaros, and I personally adore those seats. They're some of the most comfortable I've sat in. However, I don't know if the Nismo is actually worth the premium over the standard Z, but we'll get into all that stuff later. Also on the seats, even though these controls here are electric for forward and aft and the angle, these aren't electric, and some people have complained about these not being electric. I'm sorry, is this too much hard work for you, princess? Seriously, what sort of pampered loser complains about these not being electric? Plus, more stuff powered by electricity is just more stuff to go wrong, and that's not good for anyone. Also, another positive, like the exterior, I love that the designers have found this perfect balance between old school and new school. It sort of has old school charm, but it's still clearly a modern car. For example, I love that you've got physical buttons for the actual things you use all the time, but then there's screens if you want to geek out and go through sub-menus and all that sort of stuff. However, there are also plenty of complaints regarding the interior materials. There's lots of hard plastics. The leather isn't exactly real leather, and you can feel that there's been a bunch of cost cutting going on, and I tend to agree here. The fact that the handbrake is clearly for a left-hand drive market. There are carry-over items all over the place. However, an advantage with lots of hard plastics is that plenty of owners have complimented the interior, saying it's very, very resilient, and that's what happens when you use rock-hard plastic everywhere. And also, look, I know it's a performance car, so levels of practicality shouldn't really be a priority, but it can be limited in terms of spaces for all of your crap. You've got an okay sized glove box. You've got a spot here that will fit your phone quite nicely with USB-C and USB-A ports. And then, like, you technically have two cup holders, but there's issues with both of them. First of all, this one is in the worst possible position because when you're driving, your elbow just kind of naturally falls into it. But if you've got a cup in there or a bottle, it just gets in the way, especially if you've got a manual. Also, it's the wrong size. If you drink small, pretentious coffees like me, like a oat piccolo, it just vanishes down there. Now, you have a second cup holder here, which is under this. But even that's in a worse position because it goes exactly where your elbow goes. Also, this button for the lid, what I've found is that sometimes when I'm changing gears, it naturally just opens that up. So that's bloody annoying there as well. Now, you do have storage back here for your sunglasses. What does Harrison wear? He wears Ray-Bans. Good news, but this is felt line, so anything in there isn't going to rattle around too much. You do have door bins, but as I mentioned before, it's scratchy plastic, so it's going to rattle around everywhere. There's nothing under there, no sunglasses holder, obviously nothing under the seats, they're too low. That's about it up front for practicality. Also, fun fact, these come with noise cancelling technology and the full suite of safety systems. Not that either of those things are ever going to be a priority for anyone buying a car in this segment. However, one safety item that is all too often overlooked and annoyingly can be far too expensive to buy or just a faff to work out which one you're going to get are wiper blades. But don't fret, we've got a solution. Hit the Wipertech link below to get 15% off and free express shipping on the only wiper blades we use because they are seriously some of the best in the business. They're easy to order. They're a breeze to fit. Get yourself some. The link's down there. Now, as far as practicality in the boot goes, being a liftback, it's decent amount of space back here. The problem is it's sort of oddly shaped. So no matter what you're putting in here, you've kind of got to do a bit of a Tetris with your bags and whatever you're putting in here. There is also more storage behind the front seats there. That's really, really handy. But this enormous strut brace here, and again, just the shape of it, I just wish it was a little bit more like user-friendly. Actually, speaking of being user-friendly, you know YouTube makes it incredibly easy to subscribe to our channel. There's a little button down there. When you do that, it helps us out more than you know. Or if you're feeling extra generous, why not consider joining our membership program? Because you get extra ReDriven perks, like you get to find out what cars we're filming before we actually film them, and you can ask questions about that car and hopefully we'll get to answer them in the video. For example, Ethan Strout 2006 has asked, are these as good for drifting as a 350 or a 370Z? Well, yeah, if not, these are better. It's the same platform, it just has more power and more torque, so that should surely make for a better drift car. And also, Quarter Mile Burner has asked, will the Z make for a good track day weapon? Absolutely. Plenty have proven that this is a hell of a track car. It is a bit on the heavy side, so do expect to go through brakes and tyres a bit more than you would in, say, a Mazda MX-5, but still, great track car. However, let's now focus on the negatives of the driving experience. The first big one from plenty of owners is just the vision out of the thing. I'm pretty lucky because of my height, I'm not too bad, but even I'm sort of finding I'm craning my neck to see where the front of the car is. If you're a bit shorter, you know, we have heard of plenty of complaints of requiring some neck gymnastics to see where you're going. Also, the vision out the back is classic sports car, which means massive blind spots. You can kind of tell with this that the ability to park it and deal with traffic was never high on the priority list. That blind spot is bloody horrible. Next up, plenty of complaints online about the standard tyres. They just struggle to get the grip down, and also their lateral ability is a bit underdone as well. Probably why the Nismo comes with stickier Dunlops, but plenty of owners recommend fitting some Michelin Pilot Sport Cups or really any other performance tyre. They're probably going to do a better job than the standard rubber on these. Actually, speaking of the Nismo, the more observant of you would have noticed that it does have more power than the standard Z. However, it's also heavier, so the power to weight ratio is pretty much the same, although the Nismo does get its power down better and it's got more lateral grip because of the tyres and aftermarket suspension. So even though it's got the same power to weight ratio, it's probably actually quicker. Actually, just on suspension as well, a common complaint from a lot of owners is just that this standard suspension is too soft. The thing is, I think we need to remind ourselves what this car is all about. It was never intended to be some lightweight track weapon or some ultra dynamic sports car. It's trying to find this balance between being a good daily driver, good on long trips, but having a bit of a sports car sensibility. And I think it still nails that. Even used, I feel like the suspension becomes even more refined than when they're brand spanking new. And look, okay, it might be too sedate for you, but for the majority of owners out there, this still nails that brief of kind of being the best sports car for everyone. I think it's really good that it can handle bumps really nicely. I'm stoked I'm not bouncing around all over the road. And anyway, if you do want more performance out of this suspension and sharper handling, that's so easily fixed. A proper wheel alignment and a good set of tyres can make a world of difference in these, let alone swapping the suspension out for some really quality coilovers. You can transform this car into whatever you want it to be. Then we have the shift feel. There are some complaints that it can be really notchy from first to second. Do your research and homework on the owner's grips for all of that. But again, I feel like the actual shift, it suits the vibe of the car. This isn't a Mazda MX-5, it's not super lightweight. You need a bit of muscle to kind of move it around. It's not like muscle car, kind of doughy, but it just suits the car. But again, if you want a shorter, notchier feel, well, there are short shift kits out there that can tighten all this right up. Seriously, fit some quality aftermarket suspension, get the geometry right, some good tyres, maybe an intake kit and a fruitier exhaust so it doesn't sound like a vacuum cleaner anymore, and you can have one hell of a sports car. Actually, you know what? This is one of the most appealing things about this car. It's sort of a blank canvas. The aftermarket scene and the community around these cars is absolutely huge, and it's excellent. Now, if all this modifying of a car so you can create your perfect Nissan Z, or really your perfect car, seems appealing, make sure you get in touch with our mates at Automotive Superstore. They carry everything from aftermarket wheels and tyres through to performance mods, suspension mods, even car care and in-car entertainment stuff, dash cams, over 400,000 parts. We've added their link down below. They're mates of ours. Show them some love. And then, of course, you have this engine. Okay, it's seriously quick, all right? Well, like, properly quick. I mean, I don't know why you'd really want more power than what these things put out. We reviewed a Infiniti Q50 recently, basically shares the same mechanical platform as this. And between you and I, that was tuned extensively, but it was way too fast for the road. Like, we're talking terrifying sort of stuff. I suppose if you're into roll racing, that can be really handy, but I just feel like more power than this in this platform, I feel like it starts to take away from all of the other really lovely parts of the driving experience. It dominates the conversation, and I don't know, for me, this is the perfect amount of power. Yeah, I do wish it sounded better, but oh my God. It's just, you know what? It does everything a sports car like this should do. It just entices you to drive like a dickhead all the time. Also, the other issue with extracting more power out of an engine is that you then inherently have issues with long-term reliability. What's the story on that with these cars? I can't answer that because I'm not a qualified mechanic. Luckily, Jim is.
As a standard unmodified daily driver, yes, very reliable. But when you start digging a bit deeper and doing some research, you find that the problem engines and the ones that have had failures are nearly always tuned or modified. In saying that though, there are a few reports of mystery coolant leaks where you lose coolant but you can't see any external leaks. Now, a lot of people are blaming a porous casting in the block, but more often than not, it's actually a cylinder head problem where they crack around some of the head stud holes, and that does leak into oil galleries, and that can cause oil contamination and that can cause engine failure, but not hugely common though. And the weaknesses in the heads and the blocks that can cause these problems are more often than not found when the engine has been tuned and is being leaned on. Unfortunately, in the case of the cylinder heads, when they do crack, that does mean replacement cylinder heads are required, and that is not cheap. In day-to-day use, some owners are complaining about oil consumption, and you need to keep an eye on that because if the oil level gets low, that can lead to oil starvation, which leads me to another complaint where people are having engine failures because of oil starvation. And some of the engines that are failing because of oil starvation, well, quite often they are being tracked. So is it the car's fault or the use of the car? I would argue that if you are going to track one of these, if your budget allows, maybe make some modifications to mitigate the risk of that, such as a modified sump and an oil cooler as well. In fact, I'd be doing that before you start trying to extract more power. Now, in saying all that, if the car is standard and being used as a daily driver, you are extremely unlikely to have any serious issues. Now, some of the early versions, they were having some transmission issues. They were just crunching between first and second. The later models, they did make some mods to make that much better. Look, we all know these things are capable of making huge horsepower, but as Adam just alluded to, why would you chase more power when you're really only compromising the reliability? And I do agree with him, these really don't need any more horsepower. So you don't have to remember all of these common issues we've just mentioned. You can actually go and check them all out on our free ReDriven cheat sheet on the Z. The link's below.
Now, as far as pricing goes, currently on the Aussie used market, the cheapest examples kick off from around about $55,000. The most expensive non-Nismo examples, they top out around about $75,000. The Nismos, they easily add another $20,000 onto this. However, as tempting as they may be, we're not really sure if they're actually worth it. I mean, look, okay, you get a bunch of tasty mods that are factory fitted and all supported by a full factory warranty, but for thousands less, you could buy a regular Z, bolt on 10 grand worth of quality mods, and it will leave the Nismo in the dust in pretty much every department. And you could still be $20,000 better off. Plus, as the 370Z has shown, some of the Nismo models might not be asking the premiums over just a well-kept non-Nismo model. Plus, you then have to ask yourself, what else could you buy on the used market for this sort of money? Obviously, there's the Toyota Supra and the BMW M240i, and possibly even an M2 competition. Plus, because it's a Nissan and not a BMW Supra, you'd like to think that the parts and maintenance costs will be less as well. And then there's the Ford Mustang, which, look, I know, it's not exactly direct competition for a Z, but it is more than worthy of consideration too. Although it can sort of seem that the build quality and overall dynamics aren't quite at Nissan Z levels. But there's another question you need to ask yourself here, and that is, how long is Nissan going to remain in Australia? Honestly, it is anyone's guess. Plus, as Harrison has found out on this car, like so many other owners, they've experienced just stupid dealership experiences. For example, there was a recall for the front bumper harness. The problem is, plenty of owners didn't learn this from Nissan or their dealership. They found out about it via the media. But then when they've booked the car in, the car's gone in to get it sorted, they've then been informed by the dealership that the parts hadn't even been ordered yet. That is simply not good enough. But you know what? Who knows? Because if Nissan Australia and the Z were to wrap up for good, forever, surely that makes this thing a future classic. I mean, it gives you all the experience and charm of an old school Japanese performance car with just the right levels of modernity. A good used Z is a genuinely special car, and add a few tasty enhancements and this thing can be an absolute giant killer. Look, if you're completely aware of what you might be getting yourself into, both in terms of the car and the company, absolutely do it. Can be a phenomenal thing. But if all this seems just a little bit too risky, maybe check out one of these instead. In the flesh, these are such a handsome looking car. I feel like the designers have done such... Go over the top.
Now, so you don't have to remember all of these common issues we've mentioned, so you don't have to remember, wow. Now, so you don't have to remember all of the common issues. Why, what is going on?